much, Kat. So those of us who work in textiles, we're part of an incredibly ancient industry that goes back tens of thousands of years. And for most of the history of our industry, people knew pretty much, everyone would know how the textiles they used were made and by whom. They'd be familiar with the sight of a woman spinning. They'd be familiar with the sound of a loom. But with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, and even more in the last few decades, there's really been a rupture in that connection and our understanding. We no longer really understand where our clothes or our furnishings come from. We don't know who made them. It's become obscure and mysterious. And that obscurity is combined with a sense of growing horror at the environmental cost and the social cost of the textiles that we use, the clothes that we wear, which leaves many of us feeling possibly pretty hopeless. Many consumers would like to behave differently, not quite so sure how. Many producers also wanting to make changes, but not necessarily knowing where to start. So I'm Penelope Brook, and I'm joined today by three amazing makers and change makers who each in their own way is wrestling with this challenge, is looking to how you can make changes that make this industry that's become so obscure a bit more transparent, who work with circularity, who work with visibility, and also who all work with a strong sense of materiality, a returning to how we began and who we really are. So I'm really delighted to be here with Campion, with Maxwell, and with Jingjing. That's probably enough for me to begin with. I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to give you an introduction to their work. And as you'll see, Kat will be sharing some beautiful images of the work that they're doing. So Ella, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Ella, and I'm a textile designer who is passionate about transforming textile waste. And this has been the focus of my work to date, and my collaboration so far. So my background is in fashion, and in 2021, I set up my own brand when I discovered that 10 million tons of luxury hotel bed linen ends up in landfill every year in Europe alone. And with this discovery, I kind of was sent on a mission to try and find ways in which I could transform it, and ended up coming up with a nightwear collection. And this kind of experience really kind of pushed me and definitely led me to RCA and ways in which I could kind of think about transforming this material further and exploring the barriers to sustainability. So yeah, definitely this year I've focused more on kind of this fabric first approach, and continuing my exploration into waste streams, kind of looking at mainly how I can work with the hospitality industry and using kind of their waste streams, looking at food waste in particular, to use and create natural and sustainable textile dyes in collaboration with Sages London. But yeah, my main kind of focus has been around transformation, because textile waste is such a growing, huge issue. And so kind of developing zero waste techniques myself through kind of exploring methods of smocking, pleating, gathering, and crochet to, yeah, really push this and inspire conversations over what materials really can be. But yeah, for me, transparency is all about visibility, and kind of sharing data and knowledge, because I think we really need to start moving towards a kind of we way of creating, thinking and reacting. And I think the big part is to build these supply chain relations that mean we can have true environmental and social impact. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much, Ella. I think we're going to return to a number of these themes as we go on in the conversation. So thanks for getting us off to a great start. Caitlin, let's turn to you.
Hiya. So my name's Caitlin, and I would define myself as a fibre practitioner. So like to work across research and design, and I have a particular interest in developing natural-based fibres that can offer a functional purpose. So that might be more durable, temperature regulating, lighter weight fabrics. So I have a background in textiles knit. I graduated from Central St Martin's in 2015. And then I moved to Paris working with British designer Margaret Howe. And I've now found my way to the RCA. And while I've been here, my focus has really been on the processing that occurs within the knitting industry, and trying to break it down into smaller steps. And so looking at the initial stage where the fibre is grown, and kind of regenerative practices, and natural materials, and then looking at the processing of those fibres, many different stages within that: bleaching, spinning, trying to work out how we can make more durable or functional fibres, dyeing with lots of excess water, using chemicals. So looking at breaking all those down and kind of innovating within each process. And then thinking also about the use phase, which can often be forgotten, and the end of life as well. I think for me, transparency is all about just not being kind of overwhelmed with the whole picture and pretending that you can solve the whole system and all its problems with one solution, but really kind of breaking it down and sharing with other practitioners and other stages.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. Jingjing, let's come to you now.
Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jingjing. I started textile design at the Beijing Institute of Fashion, and then started textile design at the Royal College of Art as a textile design and printer design. I was inspired by home makeover show, Dream Makeover, with an episode about converting an old house into a red brick house. The whole house is a new buildings made of red brick and cement. But also because I'm Chinese, and in China nowadays they hardly use red brick as the building materials. And when I come to London, I found that most of the buildings are made with red brick. This caught my attention and led to the development of subsequent research. My project was about reprocessing construction waste, which consumes nature's resources, takes up a lot of land, and seriously pollutes the ecological environment. Cement, steel, placed red bricks, plexiglass, and other construction materials are all target of my recycling. I have been working at the heart of construction waste recycling at the Royal College of Art, and I'm currently researching how to reprocess discarded red brick, and have started a new round of red brick recycle, which will be achieved using a combination of advanced technology and traditional processes. The final materials will be made from discarded red bricks and cement as the raw materials, and plexiglass as the secondary materials to create new translucent bricks. The resulting translucent bricks will be used for soft decoration, mental purpose, and widely used in restaurant and bars, and various art galleries and more. All materials are recycled from waste, turning construction waste into treasure. At the same time, I believe that my project is is related to transparent systems. A transparent bridge between my own expertise and interested in textile design and my other interest in building materials, which I would call transparent systems. Thank you, that's all.
Thanks so much, Jingjing. And I love these beautiful translucent things that you're making as part of a transparency project. I think in some ways, each of you has already answered the first question, but maybe just as a summary one. Just to if you were to sort of summarize reasonably sort of briefly, what's the key element towards creating greater transparency? And sort of Caitlin, you rightly sort of said, there are so many pieces to this. You can't do everything. What's the piece that if you could improve that one piece, you'd feel your life's work had all been worthwhile? Ella, maybe we'll come to you for that one to begin with, and we can sort of pass it around the rest of the group.
Yeah, no, I think it's difficult to pinpoint, obviously, but I think the kind of main impact I see in my work is kind of creating like better supply chain partnerships, which I do think, we all have to work together to solve these issues at great scale. So it's been really interesting kind of me working in a way that kind of involves other people and their ideas. And that has definitely kind of rewarded me the chance of really pushing my work further and exploring textile waste, and also the possibilities of kind of seeing the ideas grow. Like I'm working with this company called Fiber Lab, which has a textile shredder. And so they'll shred kind of all kind of materials that are too small for reuse. So kind of offcuts and other things. So it's been really great working with them to kind of work this into my process and the way I make, and seeing kind of the possibilities of how we can reuse textile waste.
Thanks so much for that. Jingjing or Caitlin, would you like to comment on this question? There's the one particular element in creating better transparency that you're really wanting to make progress on.
I want to ask, in the future, you'll be going to make a plan and how to development your project and finish your project. Yeah.
So I think it's definitely something that I hope to pursue, this project, as I've already created it into a business. But obviously within that, there are lots of barriers, especially exploring the barriers to sustainability myself. And I think that probably leads on to another question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. As I was sort of saying, for those sort of listening in, we've talked quite a lot as a group before we came in and sort of thought about sort of some things that you'd like to hear us speaking about. And one of them actually was, what's turning out to be particularly hard? What are the main barriers you're facing? Obviously, if this was easy, everyone would already be doing it. Anyone like to come in on particular barriers you're running into and how you're magicking your way around those or trying to?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think I've been looking a lot at the specifics of kind of wool and hemp, and how just trying to find out more about where your fiber comes from. And there's so much secrecy surrounding that. But particularly with hemp, there's a lot of policy that is inhibiting the growth of hemp in the UK, and that's kind of stopping what could be a really productive industry within the UK. That used to be a big flax industry, a lot of linen, but that's all been, I think the last mill in Scotland closed last year, and thinking about how we can, as designers, engage with policy and politicians, and how that, looking at, like, for example, with hemp, increasing the levels of THC that are allowed to be grown in the UK, and that can produce, if we increase the levels of THC, you can create a better fibre. And then as a designer, also just understanding all the different industries that go into what you want to create as an output. So you have the agricultural industry, you have maybe the scientific industry, that when they're creating kind of fabric finishes for waterproofing, it's just really is a tricky one, trying to find this shared language between all of those different industries, because everyone just speaks such, just the words that people use and the way people think about their industry is very different. So it's tricky to find common ground sometimes, or even just access the information in a way that you understand in your own language.
Thanks for that, Caitlin. Would somebody else like to come in on this question of what's hard and how you're getting around it? You know, sort of, Ada, you've already spoken a little bit about collaboration as one of the keys there. Sort of other, what's been most challenging for you, and how have you found your way around, or begun to find your way around it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of going on from what Caitlin was saying, like localized supply chains are really difficult to create, and kind of definitely a barrier I've seen within my work and also my business, is trying to get everything made in the UK and to have a very visible, transparent supply chain of kind of from where I gather the fabric to kind of how it is created into a product, and kind of what all the offcuts becoming. So I think it's really difficult to think about, how we build these localized supply chains, and kind of sustainably.
Yeah, also just to add on another thing that I found quite difficult is, or something that I've seen a positive change that is quite slow progress, is convincing farmers or the agricultural industry that there is benefit in making these kind of systematic changes. So in regenerative agriculture, you have quite often you end up putting what was once waste into kind of a new viable product. I mean, going back to hemp, it's got so many different uses that you can use it for oil, CBD oil, or the fibre. You can use the seeds for food. You can use it for concrete, making hempcrete. Jingjing, something for you there. So just thinking about ways that we can all find value.
Did you want to come in on this question?
Actually, I talk about transparent system. For me is, for example, my project about building materials, and I buy the material, wisdom materials from to charity shop and EV, blah blah, and I think I believe industrial structures for a long term, and is sustainability push is a good line. Yeah, is my point. So transparent system. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think each of you is taking obviously as a very materials focused approach, and I feel we're sort of kind of continuing on a similar sort of theme here. What do you like about this close engagement with materials, and do you feel that sort of how does that shape what you think is possible to what extent do you feel it maybe limits what you can do? There's some reflection on what it means to get up each day and actually work, Ella, in your case, with the sort of supposedly waste linen, Caitlin with hemp, Jingjing with all this brick dust. Sort of, just talk us a little bit about what that's like and sort of what the possibilities and limitations are that you feel from this close engagement with materials. Or if you'd prefer a different question, we can go to a different question.
I can go on that one. Yeah, I think it's been really interesting limiting myself to one material, and kind of the creative challenges in that, and like, yeah, how you kind of go on from that, use every element of it, as Caitlin was just saying, like, all these different materials. Agricultural waste is such an interesting one, where you're using kind of the off parts and the excess, which is not normally utilized in a different and new exciting way, which is making new materials. And so I think for me it's all about exploring processes, but yeah, in very much like a kind of fabric first approach, which has been really interesting.
Yeah, I think working with the kind of material first is a big part of my process as well. I think if you try and look at a problem and you try and solve a problem, you kind of automatically put yourself within a specific kind of framework or box. And I think by just being quite playful with material, I mean, that's the way that I've come about this project that I've been working on lately, which has been looking at how to reduce the amount of dye that is used for recycled yarns. And so I've just been experimenting with techniques for dyeing, and I found that using very small amounts of dye on a hank of wool or whichever material you're using can then, when you knit it, create quite interesting pattern. And so I've thought, then after discovering that, I've kind of turned it on its head and thought, how can this have a better impact? And so I'm looking at ways to bring in recycled yarns back into the picture in a more desirable way. Quite often they're not the nicest color because you don't have as much control necessarily on the color that they create, or they need bleaching or over dyeing. But if you can just dye small elements and still create quite an interesting result, then you reduce the amount of water and the chemicals, if you're using chemical dyes, that are used within that.
Actually, this provides a nice sort of segue to a question I think is a tricky one for all of us. I was sort of thinking about how much I would love to wear a pullover made of Caitlin's wool, and there's sort of this question about both of sort of how we come to want what we think we want, how we come to want something that's sort of a mild, varied color, perhaps, rather than the brightest thing. But also this thing that as we've talked, troubles many of us, that the kinds of things that we're making perhaps end up being luxury goods, or the way in which we make them involves a luxury of time, which is not universally available. And so I wanted to ask you to have a go at that sort of particularly tricky question of, as we're trying to both figure out our own practice and change the industry, is there anything that we can do so that doesn't end up being a terribly elitist exercise? How can we work in a way which makes the changes that we're trying to make more accessible? And I don't know, sort of anyone want to have a first go at that one? Or maybe sort of talk in your own work about how you reflect on this.
Don't mind if anyone's got something. If you want to go, or I can go.
You go.
Yeah. I think that thinking about value and what you have to offer, and so I think a lot of this is often thought around monetary value, and but if you kind of start to create a system that's maybe more local. For example, you're potentially reducing the stages that you're reducing the transportation costs, you're potentially reducing quite a lot of elements within that development of a product, which can reduce the cost. It can also help to gain skills and new jobs in local areas if you keep a more local kind of supply chain. And then, thinking about maybe other ways like skill sharing, again, maybe easier on a more local basis. But I think if we try to take the focus away from a monetary value and start looking at value in new ways, even kind of within a community, and how a community can kind of input or receive.
Thanks for that, Caitlin. Would anyone else like to have a go at sort of how you think about this in your work? Jingjing or Ella?
Yeah. Actually, I source most of my materials from charity shop and eBay, as well as working with our school's architectural department to collect their building waste and to finish my project. And I want to light countries London's red bricks materials and have become less. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Ella, would you like to comment on this one? Or?
No, I can. I think it's a really interesting topic because it's definitely an issue that I see as well in my work is that because it's kind of very slow, there's slow processes and time consuming, it kind of boxes it into a category of luxury. But I think there's some really exciting movements in kind of circularity and looking at ownership in a different way, in the fact that kind of rentals becoming a big movement, secondhand, and I think this whole thing of buying products that are made to last. I think this will renew the sense of what kind of luxury actually means to someone, and I think it's more creating meaning behind the products that you own.
I've been much influenced by reading Kate Fletcher on craft of use, and there's something that as a obviously sort of slightly older person said coming on this, it's sort of sounding very, very much like what my mother was doing in the 1960s or 70s. So there's a sense of a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of reuse and sort of making different and sort of creating something exciting in our clothing through the ways by sort of using it differently and adding to it is something that's actually in reasonably recent memory, but where the economics of it have just changed so dramatically in the last 50 or 60 years, but instead of it not being entirely historically out of reach. Maybe to come to, after the hardball question, just a sort of a question that I hope will give those listening in a little bit more of a sense of each of you as a person, which is, so this is, obviously it's work that we love to do. It is wonderful to be able to get up every day and engage with materials and work towards something that has this amount of meaning attached to it, to have goals that are linked to the world being a better place. But then you have to get up each day. So tell us a little bit about what gives you the energy each day to keep going. What inspires you to keep working at the work that you're doing? I know you're all inspired.
I can go. Yeah, I think it is for me definitely working with my hands and exploring kind of new techniques and processes I find really exciting. And I think it's just that kind of pace of being able to try loads of new things, and the RCA is amazing at kind of pushing you to do that. Has definitely been a big part of what I've really enjoyed about doing this master's. And I think within all of that, kind of making sure that you're aware of, you know, what processes have what impact, and kind of how what you're making, you know, how that, what meaning that has. So yeah.
For that, Ella. Jingjing, how about you?
Actually, I'm curious about my many things, and the daily sunshine is something I aspire to, as well as to be an influential designer, and I hope me become a rich woman. Thank you.
Thank goodness that someone's honest about this. No, so yeah. Thank you for that. Caitlin, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's maybe a love of the outdoors. I was very lucky to have a grandma who lived in the tropical rainforests of Queensland in northern Australia growing up, and so I always felt this very strong connection to the outdoors and the elements, come rain or shine. And so growing up in the UK, I think there's a very strong connection to agriculture here, and when you just go walking, it's rare that you don't pass a kind of historical agricultural site or point of history or working farms and fields kind of today. And I think that love of kind of extends into the products that I buy, the products that I wear and use, and also that I create. So yeah, I think that's my driver.
Thanks so much for that. Wanted to check in with Kat, and sort of see, so we were wanting to make sure that we had space for any questions coming in from those who've joined us.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming into the chat, so let's have a look. So so Isabel asked about what everyone's thoughts are on the accessibility of sustainable design. I guess we kind of covered that. We had Caitlin mentioning there about making knowledge more accessible, and Ella, you were coming from maybe a more kind of practical point from your business side about how there's been a shift and more kind of rentals and making the actual product more accessible. And then we've got a question from Alexandra. Said transparency is often used in relation to ethics. To what extent do you see ethics as an important element to consider or also observe in the industry? So you had Jingjing speaking about the building industry. Ella was mentioning about Caitlin was speaking about the agriculture. I guess about the role of ethics. If anyone had any thoughts on that.
I guess I've got a thought. It's not particularly related to agriculture, but I think there's an interesting discussion at the moment about the availability of open source for designers. I think there's a lot of desire to be sharing your knowledge in order to move the discussion forward, but then there's also the question of, you know, you need to make a living, you need to kind of it's not always viable to be sharing your ideas. And so I've been struggling with that myself. How much of your process do you share and how much do you keep to yourself? I think is one that I haven't fully resolved yet, but I'm definitely thinking a lot about that at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I think we're in such like new territory, exploring all these kind of different ways of working with materials that it does feel like we need to share to gain kind of what we need within our work. But yeah, I think it is really difficult knowing how much is part of your practice.
Yeah, I wonder if, as you say, Ella, you've been working on collaborations, and I think that's a good way to maybe you can keep something within a certain kind of range, but you can still share information within a group. You kind of, even just one collaboration, you're kind of doubling your knowledge base. I think that's maybe a good way for the moment to think about it too.
But I maybe just do as a little riff on the sort of the ethics question, if anyone wants to go in this direction, which is this question we've talked about a bit of knowing your supply chain. How do you know that the things that you're using or the places that you're sending what you make are behaving in ways that are consistent with your own philosophical and environmental and social standards? And Caitlin, you've talked about this, I think, a little bit, at least indirectly, in terms of going very local. And there's a lot, obviously, in that. We're also, and I come at this as someone who spent a lot of my life working on development in the global south, of a lot of people in other countries who desperately depend on this industry for well-being. Anything that you could like to say about what you'd like to be able to, what kind of information you'd like to be able to get in order to be confident about supply chains? Sort of what are the missing pieces for you in terms of being able more confidently to work with suppliers and to work with vendors for what you're making?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with brands, they very often, they just speak with manufacturers and they don't really often, I mean, it obviously depends on what material you're working with, but if you are working with fibers or materials that have come from the agriculture section, I'm just talking from the area that I'm been working in, but the designer, I think it would be very interesting conversations for designers to have much more knowledge, and there to be a two-way input from the farmers and the designers. And so, if someone has found a specific fiber or smallholder farm that they want to work with, it's about understanding, the fiber length that you're working with, and can that mill work with that fiber length? Is your fiber compatible with that mill? And so, just as I said before, it's about a shared language, and just really, I think you just have to start by having conversations and just reaching out, and hopefully it moves in a direction where there can be more conversations between different elements of the supply chain rather than it being such a linear.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something also with kind of technology developments. Like I know obviously blockchain's talked a lot about with transparency and supply chains, in the fact that if you knew how much it cost and how much everything was kind of within making a product, if that was visible, how it the equity of that could be shared out equally, is obviously really needed, but brands don't want transparency, and there's a lot of greenwashing. I think got this fact, over 60% of sustainability claims are greenwashing. So I think that's the huge battle, is transparency really wanted by companies, and as you said, Caitlin, like legislation needs to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I saw another stat the other day by policy maker Lisa Lang, who said that 85% of a product's footprint is decided in the design stage, and so I think we do have a lot of impact as designers. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Kate. I think there are more questions. Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, so we've just got another question from Isabel. Can you recommend where designers or people aiming to work more transparently can go for resources or information to get them started?
From like a fashion perspective, the Transparency Index by Fashion Revolution is really, really good to kind of get an overview of the fashion industry and kind of, an in-depth dive into transparency.
Yeah, I find Fibre Shed amazing for this. They're really they're kind of expanding throughout the UK, working to connect kind of designers and farmers and everything in between. Led by Rebecca Early. I think she's got a really great book. And there's also I don't know what to call it. It's a group or a kind of on Clubhouse called Trash Club, and that's designers talking about various problems, but transparency is also a big part of it for their discussions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Those really great suggestions. And then we've got a question from Joanne. I've worked for big brands who often are making strides forward to be more transparent, but it's a long road and they may be embarrassed to share the good as outsiders will focus on the work still to be done. Do you think bigger brands should shout more about the progress, no matter how slow? Or should they be more transparent about the struggles?
Yes. So I want to talk in more detail about that.
There you go.
Yeah, I think that big brands have a huge responsibility here. I think they make the biggest impact in terms of negative impact, and I think that they often also have more money to put into these things. It can be very difficult for smaller designers to have the resources and the time even just to research these things. So I think that there's definitely a huge responsibility for bigger brands, and just being, I think, as I said at the start, I think everyone understands that no one's got a solution overnight. I think it's about saying, this is where I'm making progress. Where are you making progress? Let's work together.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's definitely obviously going to take a really long time, and there are so many issues that kind of these very well established brands are going to have to change a lot of how they make their products, which does obviously take a lot of time. But yeah, I think it is just that element of being transparent in the challenges and the ways in which they can communicate with their customers on their story to becoming more sustainable.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting for designers to have more to do with policy, and to have, I think quite often it's, people are put off, or I don't know if it's the language again that alienates people from these things, but I think trying to be more engaged, I don't know, just maybe picking something that is important to you as a designer once every month, or even every 6 months is better than nothing, and just looking into the policies that surround the issues that you're dealing with, and just making small steps to trying to change that, whether it's just even signing.
But I maybe turn that question round a little bit. I'm leaping in ahead of Kat here, so ask her to forgive me. We've talked a lot about the responsibilities of producers and designers. What about consumers? And maybe to make this question very specific, has the work that you're doing altered some of the decisions that you make when you go out and buy things? And what responsibility do you think that consumers have for helping change how the industry behaves? there are 2 questions in there, and you can choose the one that you like better. Has what you do changed how you buy, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been really interesting watching kind of my buying habits change. The more aware I've become of kind of issues, especially textile waste, which I've become so passionate about. So kind of looking at these fast fashion brands through a new kind of light has been kind of a big experience for me, because I used to love buying from Topshop and Zara and big fashion brands. So I think, yeah, it's definitely buying something that has a story now, I think is something that I'm really passionate about, and buying from a maker. And you know the processes, you're supporting them and their business as well, is really amazing. Yeah.
I've just looked on at the next question. I've now forgotten the last question.
I think Kat, we may have had another question in the chat.
Yeah, so we just got a question. Are there any scientific and design collaboration, e.g. bulk threads, in striving to more sustainability within fashion?
Yeah, one that springs to mind for me is Pangaya. I think it's an interesting model where they're using very small capsule collections to trial working with lots of different scientists and lots of different makers, in order to, so there's not so much pressure on one specific innovation. It's, if you've got a wider network, you can take the things that are successful forward, and you're not losing money in if one thing fails and that's the only thing you've invested in. That's
I actually had a question, Caitlin. You spoke about, you describe yourself as a fibre practitioner, and speaking about this kind of shared language. Do you think, I mean, fibre practitioner is probably quite a new term that a lot of people won't be familiar with, but do you think this has kind of presented more opportunities for textile designers and material specialists to kind of take up more space and be more present in industries that aren't maybe considered to be textiles or considered to be anything to do with textiles?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Yeah, I think as textile designers, we are lucky to have such a close connection to material, and so I think quite often it's just been about you kind of take what you have and you look forward at what you can do with that. And I think there's much more now looking both ways, and even looking at how one affects the other, and it can again go in both directions. And so I definitely think there's scope for lots of new areas. I mean, already textiles I think has quite a wide scope with, automotive and kind of products that you wouldn't really expect, but color finishes and material finishes. And so I think anything that uses a material as its base. I mean, we could go even further to say digital materials in terms of questioning consumer perceptions of what material is or where material comes from. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think sort of, I think just thinking about Jingjing's work, sort of this idea of sort of in textiles, we're the joiners of things, yes, the joiners together of things, and what you're making, Jingjing, doesn't maybe match a traditional view of what a textile designer does, but it's using so much of the skill and philosophy that are core to textiles, I think. But,
yeah, I think actually I talk about science and traditional technique is I think about, for example, is Bella was were standing naked on the show, stand by the technological nanotech technology, biofabric, spring print process is sorry, this example is about science and technical, I think. Yeah.
I fear I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just sort of reflecting really from Kat and Caitlin's conversation that we traditionally mightn't have thought someone who's doing something incredibly sort of innovative and transformational with brick dust and plastics and plexiglass as being about textiles. But I think it's very much the kind of thing that a textiles designer can find him or herself engaging in. Kat, I'm a wee bit conscious of the clock. Do we have more questions in the chat box, or are we?
Oh yeah, I think we've answered everyone's questions. Thanks so much, everyone that sent them in.
So maybe I'm sort of so just in case anyone didn't realize this, Kat is both the creative inspiration behind this program and the person who's actually organized everything so that it runs beautifully. So I'm just wanting to check in with her if she's okay with me moving just to a final round of comments from our speakers. Go with that. Thanks, Kat. So just to close out, I wanted to give each of our panelists a chance just to share a little bit of their hopes for their work and sort of how they see the work that they're doing in this sort of amazing, sort of magical time at the Royal College, how they find that, or how they hope that might translate into what comes afterwards for them. Caitlin, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, I think, I think as you just said, Kat, that it's maybe fiber adventurers, fiber practitioners, whatever you want to call it. It's not, I think that there could be a lot more weight on that kind of skill set and that knowledge base within brands. So I think just trying to see how, for me, particularly in the performance industry, I think it's really exciting thinking about how natural-based fibers can have a function, and thinking about the way they function at the moment is often through chemicals or quite harmful scientific innovation. Not to say there's lots of interesting more sustainable innovation happening, but I think for me, harnessing the full potential of natural fibers, but helping brands to see the importance of really investigating the fiber and what it can do. But there's so much available to us already. We don't have to do as much as we maybe think we do to create quite high functioning fabrics.
I have to sort of say, I think the rest of us is sort of secretly hoping that Caitlin's going to have a farm and we can come up there and do residencies and figure all of this out.
Yeah.
Jingjing, how about you? So just some final thoughts on what you hope will come of the work that you're doing here. What comes next for you?
Actually, in the future, I will be I will be use traditional technique and use science technique to finish my project about with textile design. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Ella, how about you?
Yeah, definitely kind of carrying on from hopefully building my business even bigger. Who knows? But yeah, I definitely think there's this space now for working within kind of design as a material designer, as Caitlin was saying, and I think that's really exciting, and hopefully sustainability is a big part of that role as well. So that's where I'm hoping I might be after RCA.
I think then just leaves it to me just to thank our panelists for just giving these insights into their work, what excites them, what they're struggling with, what they're hoping for, and for being the brave ones who've launched this series of panels tied into the Work in Progress show. Thank you so much for doing that. Thanks to Kat for just amazing organization. Thank you to everyone who came along and shared questions or listened. It's really great having you with us. We'll look forward to seeing you and all of your friends, if you invite people, tomorrow, same time, 1 p.m, for a panel entitled Becoming Akin or Being Akin with Nature, where Kat will be joining us as a speaker, along with Charlotte Karen and Nina Lefebvre. That's at 1 p.m. on Zoom tomorrow. And we will have a third panel in person on Friday here in the magnificent South Studio at the Royal College in Kensington. So anyone who's watching in who is not at the Royal College and is free on Friday afternoon or on Saturday afternoon, do come and visit us, see the amazing work of these wonderful colleagues. And yeah, I think that's probably enough from me, isn't it, Kat? Just thank you so much for joining. Thanks to the panelists, thanks to Kat. And